Hello and welcome to the DoneJS contributors meeting. Today is Friday, March 30th, 2018. My name is Chasen Lahara, coming to you from Long Beach, California. And I think that waffles are better than pancakes.
You will get no disagreement from me. Hello, everybody. I'm Justin Meyer from Chicago, and we were talking about Belgian waffles for the last 20 minutes.
I need to experience the real thing and see what's up.
I'm Matthew from Kentucky. I also like waffles a lot.
All pro waffles here. I like it.
Yeah. No detractors.
So today we're going to demo what we've been working on for the past couple of weeks. And then if there's any, I didn't check the forums, but if there's any topics to discuss, we'll go through those. Matthew, you want to get us started with demos?
I guess I do. Yeah.
All right. First, how do people feel about crepes?
Oh, all on board. There's a great creperie.
Better than waffles?
Oh, they're different. They're a different food.
But you got to pick one.
Oh, I have to pick one?
Yeah.
Oh.
I don't know if I've ever actually had a proper crepe. A crepe is like the super thin thing, right? It's like
super thin pancake, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You do roll them up or something? I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. Go if you go to like France, they have a lot of that everywhere too.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've only had like the hotel buffet crepes, which are probably not
the same.
Okay, well, yeah. With that being said,
yeah, Chasen's dodging this question like a politician.
Yeah, I mean, there's savory crepes, there's sweet crepes. I guess just on versatility, I'd have to go with crepes over waffles, but I don't want to put waffles down.
The one thing I will say is I'm probably one of the only people that likes pancakes without syrup. Like I like them with syrup as well, but I'll eat them just like with butter, and I think that's delicious. And it's a little bit, can't really do that with a waffle as easily. It kind of necessitates the syrup. So pancakes are very diverse. I'll say that.
I think you would really like crepes then.
Well, they're sweet though, right? I like the savory.
They're what you can do savory crepes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try that. All right. Well, with that being said, I recently wrote a article about error handling in DoneJS and error messaging in DoneJS. I took up this task in the last epoch. This was, we do a community survey. Chasen, would this have been the last? What's not the last? The 2 surveys ago? Is that right?
I think it was from our last survey. Yeah. I mean, not the one that we just finished a week or 2 ago, but from the previous one. Yeah. So this is what we were working on for the last epic.
Yeah. So I think it was the #1 voted thing, which meant, a lot of people have saw the need for it. So I kind of set out to do a couple of things. One was I wanted to make sure just that our error messages improved. There's a lot of common scenarios that people run into often. I want to make sure for those that we have, really solid error messages. The other thing I want to do is I want to make sure that our server-side rendering could, because people use DoneServe for development, I want to make sure that was very resilient to error messages because, once you kind of have your hot module replacement set up, live reload set up, you don't want to have to restart your, kind of get used to that being on. So I want to make sure that people could stay in that flow once they got there. So we wrote an article about it. Maybe I can show this video. It is kind of a long one. Now this video goes through how what I was just talking about, how DoneServe is able to show error messages as they happen.
Is this picture-in-picture right now?
Can you not see it?
No, I can see it.
Oh. Well, I didn't know. I was like, maybe I should Mac full screen it, but then I don't know if that'll work. You kind of see, I'm not gonna show the whole video, but kind of see that we have a working app at this point. Then if we try to import something that doesn't exist, live reload's working and it's gonna reload to the error page, and then you see the error messages. You see it both within the server context, but also within the browser. And then you get a link to a better error message. Stealjs.com has, I think it only has a couple of them right now, but the idea is that, Steal is a common source of errors. well, you see them through Steel because you make typos, which cause syntax errors, that kind of thing. I think this is going to show a syntax error. No, this is actually fixing. This is fixing it. Once you fix it, it's going to live reload and show your app again. So anyways, yeah, I want to keep this pretty resilient. Let's see if there's any funner part.
It does the syntax error next.
Does the syntax error. Which again, this is another common type of error that you get. And there's the error.
So slick.
It's pretty good. You fix it, and there you go. So this is the idea, is that DoneServe is going to be more resilient. Hopefully you can just keep that thing running all the time. If you run into any issues, we consider it a bug. If you have to restart DoneServe, you should never have to do that. Remember the early days of working on DoneJS, I had to make it so that you could npm install something and keep live reload working. So that was like an early version where, it's kind of it's a very stateful thing. So making sure that it stays up when you kind of make a lot of changes it doesn't expect it's kind of an ongoing thing that I have to work on. But anyways, the other thing this article talks about is kind of a little bit of philosophy and like how error messages are important. Error messages are another way of learning. Is a lot of times you might learn a little bit about a project, but then you just start working on it, and error messages kind of guide you, or they can be a guide to help you kind of understand the library that you're working on a little bit better. So that's kind of what we've done with some of these error messages. This talks about the 5 W's, the what, who, where, why, how, etc. And in the article, I kind of explain using this example what each of those 5 W's.
So this is actually part of the reason why I wanted to use template literals. Was because
because writing your messages is not is lengthy.
Yes, it's horrible to write long, nicely formatted error messages if you're doing string concatenation.
Yeah.
So I started wanting to put this a lot of places in CanJS, and it's like, it's like it makes me not even want to do it when I use string concatenation.
Well, the other thing is, not to get on a tangent, but like Done Auto Render has this build because it's just basically a huge template.
Yeah.
Actually, the source code is in this template.txt file, and this is like a one of those like underscore templates. So yeah, if we had string templating, I wouldn't need that, which would be pretty cool. Anyways, back to this. Yeah, this goes through some of the error messages, tries to explain, what it is that we try to improve, and then lastly talks about DoneJS error format, which is a project that I made as part of this. In that video, you saw those error message pages. That's it's formatted HTML, so you can use this to create those same HTML that you can use in your application, because I know a lot of people do use DoneSSR middleware directly. I see this all the time. So you can kind of get the same thing pretty easily. Yeah, so that's the article. Check it out. It's on toby.com/blog. So that is my demo.
Cool.
Thanks, Matthew. Justin, you want to go?
Yes, I do. All right. So I am demoing just this data layer proposal. This is kind of a topic, really. Let me share my screen. Okay. So for the last, off and on for the last couple of weeks, I've been making progress on a replacement for CanSet. This is actually the #1 voted thing to do for the first community survey, and we're finally getting around to doing it because we wanted to, get a 4.0 out earlier. So this is going to be part of 5.0. our plans right now for 5.0 is to add this new data layer and probably get tree shaking working. The improvements to can set, the goals, well, if people aren't familiar with can set, that's in 3.0. What it enables is us to do real time and certain caching abilities. So if you've used the Place My Order application, if you make a whole bunch of requests at once, well, it's able to combine those requests and make a single request. It's also able, it supports our real-time behavior, so it knows if I request all to-dos due today, you can create a set so that it knows if a new to-do is created, it knows to put it in that list or remove it from that list if suddenly it was no longer due today. So it's got set awareness. So that's why it was called can set. But I'm calling this new thing can query, even though it is kind of so closer to performing set logic. But that's kind of how its internals work. The external interface is more about just like querying your server with specified parameters. So I'm going to walk through. This is all going to take a little bit here to walk through the ideas of it. Please find this issue. It's the latest issue right now inside CanJS. Add comments, concerns, thoughts on it. So the goal here for the replacement for CanSet is it's very difficult to configure CanSet or make it use different data types. That was kind of priority number one. Priority number two was it wasn't able to do a lot of MongoDB style operators. Like if you wanted everything greater than the number 10, right? If you wanted every person whose age is greater than 21 or something, that you'd have to build your own operators to do that. Those weren't built in. So we're going to have a bunch of those built-in operators that you can use. And then there were some technical problems that I wanted to solve, which is can set didn't really make a formal distinction between members and subsets. And I'm fixing that. And I'm going to walk through kind of what all of this means. So if you are going to match your service layer to what CanJS expects, we wanted a fairly straightforward, easy setup. Instead of previously CanSet, you would define your type and then you would create your set independently. What we're going to make it is that when you one thing that I realized is when you're defining your to-do, you really are specifying what the types of your properties are. So a lot of what I'm showing right here isn't finalized yet. This is kind of the stuff that can change the most, but the idea is that you'll extend your define map or can observe, and you will give type information. So like your ID is of number, and it is the identity. It uniquely represents this a to-do instance. You have a complete that can be Boolean, it can be true, false, or null. And you have names that can be strings or null. That's why I'm using maybe here. And you have a status property that you want to make essentially a special type. So I want my status to be either assigned, in progress, complete, or null. And then I can assign this as the status type. Now already you can probably see like validations should be able to hook into this in the future, but that's not really the goal right now. But I definitely would like it so that you know, we can say that, oh, if someone tried to set status to something other than assigned, eventually we can either throw an error or just start giving warnings that that has happened. Okay, so then the next thing that I would like to see for 5.0 is instead of having to use CanConnect directly, if you're just getting started with CanJS, we make it very easy to essentially set up a real-time RESTful connection. So I'm mostly proposing just creating a real-time REST behavior, which is just basically the REST plus real-time. This actually already exists as base map inside CanConnect, but this would be its own independent package, really. And we would just point people to, hey, you want a real-time RESTful connection? Give it the URL, and you're going to pass it the type. And I'll walk through this in a little bit, but essentially we're going to just be able to read these properties here and essentially figure out what the algebra, the set logic should be from that. Similarly, if you wanted to create a fixture that kind of looks like a MongoDB that is what CanJS expects, you just pass it your URL and you pass it your type, and it will, it'll be empty at first. You can pass it an array of to-dos with a different signature, but with this one, it'll create essentially an empty array of items, and then you can post and then start retrieving them once you've created them. And then this is what the final request type looks like. So if you want to get a list of all to-dos that are, or a list of to-dos that name is alphabetically greater than eat, that are all complete and that are either assigned or complete, then this is your filter. It'll get all of them that match that. Then you can provide a sort. Say I want to sort by name descending alphabetically, and you can provide pagination. So as I said, for 5.0, these operators in here that are going to be supported are all of the Mongo comparison operators. So you have equal, in, greater than, less than, not equal, those things. I am not going to support initially a full set of logical operators, your ands, nots, or nors. You have and there is an or, but you don't format them like this. That won't be there for launch, but that can be added in later. So as I said, if you're building your service layer, this is if you want everything to go super, super easy for you, you build your service layer to look like this. And this is a service layer close to, but not exactly what JSON API expects. It expects those same properties for sort and for page for pagination, and for filtering is the filter property. So I'm matching this for what these properties are, but it's not going to match JSON API, at least for the initial release, because I don't want to rewrite can connect for it to expect different data than can connect currently expects. Can connect currently expects data to look like this, where you've got an object, it's got a data, and that's an array of the individual properties. JSON API expects it to look like this, and I'm not gonna, at least my recommendation is not to rewrite can connect right now to support that. That can happen later.
So is all of the request data the same as JSON API? Like even inside filter, how those are structured and what have
So they don't actually propose anything here.
Okay.
So it's kind of like they just say do your filtering in here as part of that spec, although there is work on narrowing down what these will look like. But since that's not done or really like part of the formal project anyways, I'm just going with what Mongo looks like.
Cool. So that matches the same structure that Mongo would expect.
Yes, except that these kind of operators are not, you can't do this kind of thing. Like if you want, you can do an and, well, that's technically an and already, right? If you want to, this is effectively an and. And if you put an array here, that's effectively an or. But like to actually use $and like this in the way that they're showing it here, also, I don't have exists working, but that would probably be a good one to add. All I've gotten working was these operators, because I did a poll kind of within Bitovi, and most people said like these ones they don't really need as much as they need the other ones. So for release, I'm not planning on supporting these, but people can build them. That's the important part now. It's going to be a little bit, well, it's possible to build these things, and I think it's a little bit easier and more clear and much easier to test building your own operators. But we'll get to that in a moment. Any other questions on that right now? Well, hopefully it makes sense. Okay, so go ahead.
Real-time rest. You show that It takes a map, so it mutates the map to add the git list.
Yes. Yeah. Now we could, I mean, originally can connect would return a connection. You had to do everything there. I just found that extremely inconvenient. And I still really like the ability to just like create a to-do and call save and get list directly on it. All right. So next thing, which should make a lot of people happy if they have 4.0 apps or 3.0 apps, is that I've already made. It's just called compat right now, but I'm kind of proposing what I think the final APIs will look like and things. There's going to be a set compat module within can query, and that returns something to you that looks just like the old can set. It has this algebra constructor function. It has all of these props that used to exist. It is not 100% fully backwards compatible. If you try to create your own, essentially props, the way that props were created previously, that's not supported. But all of the props that we have created are supported, and an additional one which is called ignore, which is what people were most of the time creating their own props for. So my guess is for most apps, the worst case scenario is you just import this, you create your own query. Then you might need to change like where you were just kind of returning true, which is the old way you ignored properties. You just have to call set props ignore for that. And that's it. And it's fully backward compatible, works, assumes all of the other behavior, like it works just like the old can set did, but it creates this new can query type that instead of essentially us being able to build the query from your map type, you pass that explicitly. This is like your algebra with 3.0. I want to make it so algebra is like looked for after query. So if you supply if you kept it like algebra down here, it'll still work, but the new suggested parameter you pass is query. So good, backwards compatible. Okay, so let's talk about how you can configure if your service layer doesn't match what can query expects. So the first way is like your request parameters don't match. What you need going to the server is like a where name is foo or something like that, right? You need that instead of filter, which is the default. So how do you do that? Well, this is easier to configure now. When you create your query, you have two functions, and they are used to kind of go back and forth between what your parameters to the server are and what our query format is supposed to look like, and the reverse of that, to go from our query type to the parameters. So if you pass both of these, then like every kind of thing works out for you. You can actually still call, you would actually be able to call your find all or your get list with where here instead of filter, and it would just work. So this set algebra will do that for you if you're using the old compatibility one. But if you need to, like, you're learning this new and building something new, and your server doesn't match, well, you just provide these ways of translating it, and it does it what you need for you. And then once you've built your query, like I said, instead of passing the query being built automatically from your type, the query is built. You pass the query.
It'd be kind of cool if those functions were the first two parameters, because I feel like those are going to be the same for all of the different APIs are going to have the same type of conversion functions. So I'd probably want to create a new
like an object. Yeah, it would be. Well, I would think it would
also be like query.bind and then pass in my two functions, because that way I could just pass that around.
Yeah, or just the second option is an argument or something like, or takes an option like toQuery and toParams, and then yeah, we can create like, hey, you've got a feathers.js or a sales whatever, and here's the feathers.js and the sales. Well,
I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about using it because I mean, when you're going to have the same one, like even in your app, however you happen to name things, it's all going to be the same throughout your APIs. You're not going to.
Yes, that's true too. Yeah. Yeah, you'll build it once, and then just like every single query, you'd pass those two functions to. Yeah, that's a good point. I should change this to an object. Can you jot that down because I'm talking right now?
Well, I'm not saying change the object. I'm saying, well, I mean, object's fine, but having it as the first parameter means you can, more easily use.
I guess the only difference is you always need this type here, or you really do need that type for it to be able to be like, okay, I understand like that. I understand that status is a enumerable.
No, I know. I'm not saying you wouldn't provide the type.
Okay, well let's talk about. I mean, I'm very open to changing it.
All right, I'll add a comment.
Okay, so that's one way. Now, let's say, okay, so that way it just supports. You can change it to your service layer to essentially provide a description of how to convert your service layer to what CanQuery can provide. Now, let's say CanQuery doesn't provide something that you want. Now, this gets much harder in that situation to be able to produce this, and this is something that I feel like was almost impossible for anybody other than myself to figure out for CanSet. But here's how you do it. So what I want is to, I guess I'll skip to the end. Did I show it? What I want is, oh, I guess I do show it. What I want is to say, hey, my name, that's a searchable string. And I want it, so if someone does name eat, well, that can match beat or eat beans, right? This is essentially the way name can be queried has, I don't know how you say it, but it's like, it's not just going to do an identity match. It's going to do like an index of kind of thing, right? It's going to see that the name here contains the value here. Okay, so this is not something that it supports by default, CanQuery. So what I want people to be able to do is create these searchable strings or whatever these types are, and ideally share them with the community, but also build them easily enough for themselves. So here's how you would do that. But you have to define first the set that does comparisons. So this is like, you could think of it as that eat here is going to be converted into a set, the set of all things that match eat, that have eat in them, all to-dos that have part eat in them. Okay, so that's always is going to just take some value, what was ever passed here, and it's going to save that. The next thing is you need to describe what is a member of the set. And I actually just realized I wrote this the wrong way, but essentially what values inside, this is going to be the property value of a to-do, are in this set. So in this case, I should have done it the other way, which is to say like, oh no, I did it the right way. If the to-do is eat beans, that includes the value that the person searched for. So this is the is member on your type. You have to provide the is member symbol. The next thing you need to do is say, hey, how does this search? How does eat? If someone searched for eat, how does that compare to if someone's just searched for beat? How can you do a union of that type or an intersection or a difference? Now, I don't want to go right now into the details too much of like how set theory works, but essentially the coreest, like the most basics, like root math of like set theory are these three functions. And things like if two sets are equal or two sets are a subset of each other, that can all be inferred from the results that these three things provide. So like if I wanted to do a union of like eat and then someone also searched for beat or something. Well, really the union of that is just going to be eat. Because if you get everything with eat, then you've got everything with beat. So like I can check if like one is essentially a superset of the other and return that. Otherwise, I can return, there's an or type if you're getting fancy. Because there is room for or, just not the way that Mongo specifies it. So I can say like, oh, okay, if one's a superset of the other, then I'm gonna return that one. Otherwise, I'm just gonna like or them and return that as what would be the result of a union. And you fill out this logic. One thing I realized while doing this is that obviously this is kind of complex and tricky. What I realized is I could probably end up doing the reverse, is in deriving what union, intersection, and difference is if people provide something like an is subset. To say like, well, if you have one searchable string set compared to another searchable string set, what is one a subset of the other? Return that. And then I can, it might not be able to do this kind of thing, to do the or for a union, but it would be able to like get kind of subset set equals and things like that figured out. So there might be more minimal things people can provide. Because like intersection is kind of, or like difference is almost impossible in this. That's why it's returning these unknowables and things like that. So I think I can build this into. Okay, so the final thing is you actually don't, the searchable string itself does nothing but point at the searchable string set. And there's reasons for this, is because like if someone provides a to-do and says it has a, let me go back down to this. If someone has a, okay, if someone had a to-do, but to-dos had like an owner inside of them, well, that might be of type user. And we don't want, user isn't it's an instance of user, but it is not, you don't use user as the set logic. So these types end up pointing at the actual sets. So that's why there's like a distinction between your, essentially your set type, searchable string set, and the actual like constructor function that you're providing. And that is all wired up with this other symbol called set type. Okay, any questions there? All right, so let's go into how it works. So the idea here is you have your to-do and you define it, right? And we kind of already looked at, we kind of know a little bit of the set type stuff and whatever. Essentially, all of our constructor functions that CanJS is going to produce, like on maps, define maps, and can observation, are going to have a schema, a can.schema symbol. And can reflect will be able to get you a schema given a type, and that will return information about the identity properties and the actual properties and their types. So when you pass a to-do to CanQuery, it's actually reading the schema, right? So it's actually getting that schema. And you can pass a schema directly. You don't need to kind of create a constructor function for it. And so you create a query, essentially is going to create the set algebra of old based around this schema. And you can actually have nested schemas. That works now too, which is cool. So you can have like to-do has a user, and then like user has its own schema, and it can do things. The logic actually works. That's why yesterday, if you remember, like I was saying, like I was so happy yesterday because it just worked. I didn't really have to do it much to get like the recursion ability to work. I was really dreading making that work, but it just worked.
That's always a satisfying feeling. When
yes. I mean, I'm still suspect that it's not totally working in every case, but like the cases that were part of my tests all passed. So I was very happy about that. Okay, so what happens is it builds this to-do query type, and then this is what you use to do unions between these raw, what do we call kind of query objects, right? These plain query objects. What the query logic can do is it takes this raw plain JavaScript object and it converts it to something like this. this is basic query is essentially what handles sorts and pagination. Plus, it has a filter, and then and does logical ands based around property names and their values. And then because it was the name property here, it's going to create a status. It's really going to create an instance of the status's set type, status symbol set type, and say it's assigned. So essentially, there's a whole hydration process that CanQuery is going to do that take this and build these other types out of it. And then there is an internal version of kind of CanSet, which when passed like an assigned set and kind of an equivalent complete set is going to look up their, essentially these symbols. It's going to look up like the comparisons that were registered before. So like we're kind of doing these registration of, hey, when you compare a searchable string to a searchable string, here's how you do the difference intersection, things like that. Well, there's all of that already for and basic query, and they can use each other internally. So essentially what's going to do is look up how to do a union on a basic query versus a basic query. And that union actually will use its internal filter, how to do an and versus an and union, and all of this other stuff to like eventually produce the final. So this is showing how it's kind of like what basic query is. It's actually going to produce a basic query, which is itself a union of the assigned sets filter properties and the complete sets filter properties. Right. So this is kind of like recursing down to do the union. And then what that eventually results in is a new status of assigned and complete. There should actually be an array kind of on either side of that, but then that finally gets serialized back to this. So there's kind of like hydration. It gets converted to all of these types. These types have all of these kind of comparisons that they've defined on how to compare an and to an and to everything, a basic query to a basic query. They all do that, and then you get out a result like this, and then it says serialize it, and you get back out this. How those, when we do that, I kind of explain this down here because Adam asked a lot of good questions. He was like, oh, how does that define comparisons work? We talk about, we showed it up here, this define comparison. Essentially what this is doing is registering, you can almost think of it as operators like equals and greater than. We're essentially registering how do you do a union between these two types. Under the hood, what happens is it all gets, on every type, there's a special symbol, and that essentially has a mapping of the comparisons that it can make. So like if we did a comparison between foo and bar type and we provided the union difference intersection function, essentially on foo, you can read through these series of maps to get the foo and bar comparisons. And because union and intersection are symmetrical, because in theory, it should be that if you reverse the arguments of an intersection or a difference, it really shouldn't matter. I think it registers, it does some stuff to like create methods that essentially then reverse the arguments and call the original ones. So you also get kind of, by registering these, you get union and intersection for free, but it isn't able to do a difference because differences are not symmetrical. Anywho, any questions before I guess there's one final thing I'll talk about.
Can you show the schema again?
Yeah, this is very much still up in the air as well.
It's the properties, you only need the type there, or is that going to be like the property definition?
I only need the type because we're able to read the set from when using that symbol, the set type symbol.
Okay.
So Adam had a whole bunch of questions. The one he talked about, like, what's the difference between member and subset. So this was a problem with can-set, is that it kind of merged what member and subset logic was, which it really shouldn't have been. You could, and this really matters because like what you search with or how you represent your set might have like very little to do with the underlying properties. Now, in reality, a lot of times there's a huge amount of overlap, but I could create, it's possible the server wants a search text property that does the search instead of just using, you know, the name of the to-do. So this would search for everything with ice cream. So we need to be able to have a set like search text needs to be able to say if a to-do like this is a member of the set. But we should be able to compare these objects as like doing unions, intersections, difference, but membership is kind of a separate thing. So that's why you provide like kind of up above, this is why there's both. You provide if you're a member, which seems is the same logic for subset in this case, right? It would be the same logic if we asked them to fill out a subset, which is this. It's basically the same logic, but even so, membership can be different in how the logic for it than union, intersection, and difference. So that's why you kind of have this difference of how things are defined. I did think about making it so instead of there would be another set method, which is just like define, you know, membership or something between like anything and a set type instead of having to like do it on the prototype here. This still might be up in the air for like what the final form of how you define what a type's test for membership looks like. I don't know. We'll see what happens there. So this is it. I think I explained everything that I wanted to. Any questions?
I'm looking forward to actually reading through this again. I feel like your explanation was good, and it takes a second pass over to fully soak everything in.
Yeah, I mean it's tricky, right? I mean, there's my hope is what the really big thing, the advantage here, I think, in it is that you don't have to create your connection. There's kind of two big advantages that I think. One is for users, and that we can just kind of give them types, and they just kind of have to know what these types do, more or less. Like, but they don't really have to understand how they work. It's just like, what does it mean to be maybe a Boolean? Well, it means it can be null or not null. Okay, fine. We can go. I was thinking like we bring back the can types of 4.0, and we just make like, you know, just a dumping ground for a whole bunch of different type, and we have some basic ones. I thought. You know, some ones that are just like you pull in can types, you just get a whole bunch of the basic ones. And then maybe there's a whole bunch of other ones that are like fancy search text, whatever. We just create a module, just throw it in there, right? Or make it available somehow. That's really nice for users, I think, because then they don't have to actually build their query. It just for them. And now we have like a target, like a well-defined target for like, make your service layer, take filter, you know. If you don't actually ever use greater than, fine. Just make sure your service layer, you know, that's fine. It will try by default to like, if it sees these, it will make a request for those, but that's okay. Okay, that's good for users. Then I do think, at least for like people who are going to be facing down kind of the next level of challenges, this is actually far easier to test and to reason about than the old way of kind of creating those weird props that can-set had, because I can actually create instances of searchable string set and then just call set.union between two instances and see what the result is. You know, tests for like other types. Here's make real number tests. I can create my type. This is my set type, and I just can then do, hey, is 1 through 4 a subset of 0 through 5? It is. It's true. Okay, I can just test this. I don't have to test it in like within can query. This doesn't even pull in can query. This is its own kind of world. It just has to pull in like that subpart of can query, which is the set, so that things are registered and it knows how to do the operator on it. But it's much easier to take off a byte, I think, and test something like this than to build the bigger query and have it run through like basic query, essentially. So the one final thing I want to think about is like how to make this. I think this technology is, it's complex technology. Arguably one of the more complex pieces of CanJS in terms of like wrapping one's head around it. But it's really useful, and it can be quite powerful if we can get it right. We can fundamentally just do real time without any having to do anything else. You just specify your set, and it knows whether things belong in your set or not. It can do all these other caching optimizations too. How do we make this useful so like other projects, like an Angular or React folks, might find similar benefit here, right? If you're doing Redux, can this help you? Like if you're trying to do a real-time Redux app, can you create your query and then you just kind of like, you're just using is membership with your set, and it will just tell you like whether you should add this to the array, and you can get indexes, and you just, we could build little tooling to like even make like a reducer where you give it its socket connection, and you just tell it where the properties are in your where your lists are in your global state or whatever, and it will be able to see that event and reduce and kind of insert items in the right place. That kind of thing, I think, can be really useful. But I don't, this isn't a question we have to answer right now, but it's just one thing that I've been thinking about as the technology is getting closer to being released. So much for a 5-minute demo.
Define maps. So what does define map have to do to make this work? Does it just has to define the can.schema or whatever? Is that how it?
That's exactly what it works. It needs to have a schema.
So how would it's like with can observe types.
So presumably, I'm thinking the decorators are going to have to add something to the like maybe there's like a schema property on the constructor function or something like that they're going to essentially be adding things to, so that when get schema is called, it knows what's there.
Yeah, seeing all these new symbols really makes me think. I really like using symbols as like a, it's like an interface or protocol.
Yeah.
Wonder if, and seeing the what was the one you're showing, the is member type. Wonder if we can do something to make it easier to kind of mix in protocols, because there's all these different protocols that you might want to implement.
Well, one thing,
maybe decorators are like the future of that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we do, I started to do for CanJS for all the decorators around observability is there's actually a testing suite called CanReflect tests that you can pass it its type, and it's going to like, okay, I'm going to try to, can I call set key value, get key value, read it back? Can I, is it map like? And it runs through a battery of tests that I then use to like make sure can define, can observe, and can simple map, and can map all pass. So that's one way that we can just be like, like we could just create a test suite that's like, okay, give me something that is a member, like give me a set and give me something that is a member, give me a set that are subset, not subset, that kind of thing. And it's just going to like run through a battery of tests to make sure that we've got all those symbols created and it works. So we can do stuff like that for kind of authors to at least help us. Cool. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited for it, but I think there's a lot of work that we need to do to like make it. I really would like to see it be used other places because it feels like a waste if it's just in CanJS on its own. I do plan on talking with the JSON API people. I don't know where else I could really go to turn to be like, hey, maybe think about using this.
I think the Redux idea was that's kind of cool. If you just have one that just automatically, because that's always been somewhat of the problem, I think, with the previous versions of Can Connect is that you can't really just give, as far as like using outside CanJS, is that you can't really just give Can Connect to another framework and have them use it because,
observability. Yeah,
Can Connect is so tied to observability, whereas maybe this is not.
Yeah, this is not tied to observability. Yeah, they would just, it is, you would have to like, for a reducer, it's really like, you would say that, tell you, the shortest hand would be like, where do you keep your list of to-dos? The shortest hand would be like, we keep, we'd have like query reduce or something. And somehow you'd have to pass it like, okay, I keep my list of items in the global, like from the global state perspective in the store at like, to-dos, dot items or something like that. And you can say, like, somehow you can tell it, I want to manage that list. I don't really know what it would look like, but presumably you can say like, here's that data, go manage it for me. I have no idea, but that would be cool. Cool. All right. Thanks. Check this out. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully people upgrade to 5.0 just to get it.
Cool. Let's talk about that. So this will be a 5.0 feature. Are you working on Can Connect? Where are we on?
3, I think.
3.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we wanted to also hopefully get the tree shaking stuff. That should not be a problem. VS modules. Well, we talked about actually that being the new, like just if you just import can, you would get that. So that we actually need to make a list when Kevin gets back. Maybe next hangout we can talk about what should actually go into Can 5.0.
Yeah, there is an issue open where some stuff has been collected. There's always an issue.
Think about that.
I think that can set or the new can query stuff plus the tree shaking, I think is plenty fine. That's good. I really would like to get to releases that are incremental in this way. Like we're not going to break anything else. And if you want to use the old versions of, can component, we're not going to go a new version of can component or of anything other than can fixture, can connect. And now this new can query is going to be added in.
What about the queues thing?
What about it? What queues thing?
Oh,
that would be a nice one. You're right. Yeah. That would, but then we fundamentally change everything. Maybe not. I don't know. That one might be able to not cause the ripple effects that like can queues did. That's a good question. We need to do it in like an investigation spike on that one, I think, before we make a decision, because it might be possible to do without like big ramifications. Or we just like, what I could see is us just creating another like package and then just migrate everything to using that package instead of can observation. Anyways, Jason, you got something though, right?
I do. Let me share my screen.
Yeah, since we're almost out of time.
Yeah, make this quick. So earlier this week, I published our.
I think you're presenting me to everybody, and not that I mind.
Sorry,
but
I need to present myself. Thank you. Yeah, so earlier this week, published a community update. The format of this is a little less text heavy, and more links to stuff because we've been publishing lots of blog posts and what have you. So the big highlights were CanJS 4 and DoneJS 2 and the stuff that's in those. We've been talking about like creating all of these guides. The debugging guide, if you haven't checked this out, I highly recommend just reading through this entire thing. It's not too overwhelming to go through the entire text. The forms guide is very comprehensive. It's very long. Just about anything forms related you can find on this page. I highly recommend that anyone just skim through it to kind of know what's in the guide and use it as a reference for when you need to do stuff. If you do read through this guide, I guarantee you will learn something. I learned something. Maybe I can't guarantee that for Justin, but I know I certainly read through it, or I certainly learned things when I read through it. What else? Matthew talked about all of the like new error messages and handling. There were a bunch of updates to various packages. So get on the latest of the Steel and Done packages if you want all of that. All of these awesome messages. Justin's been putting out a lot of YouTube trainings. So over the last few months, there's been some how it works for can queues and observables and etc. And then some actual like building an app and an overview of 4.0. Every 6 weeks, we have our community survey. Justin just talked about the can query stuff. And Matthew has started on the tree shaking issues. I'm going to start on the routing, improved routing to components next week, and then I'll be able to work on the routing guide and testing guide. And then I think when Kevin is back, he might be able to get started on DevTools. We've got meetups scheduled in a couple weeks in Chicago and Los Angeles. I know Justin's building a new app for the Chicago DoneJS LA. And then I'm going to be going over one of the CanJS guides. We'll talk about that in a minute. Want to give a shout out to Martin. Steel SAS was an unmaintained project. We didn't have the resources to dedicate to making it actually good. And Martin's taken up the task. So he's starting to maintain Steel SAS. Wanted to give him a shout out and a thank you to everyone who contributes to our projects. It makes the wheels turn. And at the end, shout out, like, if you don't know, we're Batovi, and you can hire us for web and mobile application consulting. So you can contact us through batovi.com or our Twitter or what have you. Yeah, so that's the community update. This is the DoneJS LA that I'm going to be hosting in a couple weeks. We're going to be in lovely Santa Monica in, what's the term we use for that? Silicon Beach, I think is the term that people use. So that's coming up. And then some unrelated things that I worked on this week were some changes for CanStash in a new package. So I want to go through that briefly. So this is going to be in the next minor version of CanJS. Well, I'm guessing that we'll release a 4.2 maybe next week. So in 4.0, we haven't had a data helper. And there's a new DOM data helper that kind of replaces the previous data helper in CanJS 3. It uses, under the hood, it uses can DOM data, which under its hood uses weak map. If you haven't used weak map, it's available in IE10, IE11 plus, and it's a way of associating objects with values in a way that once there are no more references to the objects that are used as keys, then it can release that memory. which is awesome for this use case because we want to associate data with some DOM nodes, and we don't want to have to keep track of when they're removed from the document. So this can just like store data in a weak map, and then when the element's gone, the data is gone. No worries. So this, the stash helper has the same signatures as the data helper did in CanJS 3. You can pass it a key to associate the current context, or pass it a key and a value to associate some specific data with an element. And then you can retrieve that with the can DOM data package, which has a more simple API. You don't have to use call anymore. You can just do like DOM data.get the element and the key, or DOM data.set element key value. Any questions or comments?
Are we down to one DOM data now? Because I know we've had so many DOM datas.
We're down to, this is the only one that's going to be documented on our site.
Okay.
And it is the way to go. So yes, there's the one.
DOM data state deprecated.
It was just used internally for stuff. Yeah.
Oh, that might be one other thing we want to add to the 4.0 or 5.0 list, is just like fully getting rid of can util. That would be really good. Yeah, so just to summarize for everybody else, like the place where you use this in CanJS is where you have weird integrations. Like you've just rendered a whole bunch of like DOM with stash, and for some reason, maybe you've like, I know the drag drop example uses it because the drag drop is really DOM centric. You suddenly are in DOMville, and you don't have really access to like the view model. You got to do things in the DOM. It can be a really nice way of saying like, okay, well, once you start going down the DOM path, if you need to get back to data, here's a way to get back to data. So you render your template with DOM, with the data association of an element. You associate your elements with data, and then when you're just messing around with the elements, you can go get the data from it.
Yeah, and that's a really good explanation of it. This came out of our need to update the playlist editor guide from CanJS 3 to CanJS 4. So here's an example of what Justin was just talking about, where you need to associate some data with an element, and then that's actually used. Check out the view model. Then we can get that data while we're inside of the view model. That's
actually inside of the component, I think. Or control. That's inside of the control. You can't control.
I did. Oh, okay.
Because sometimes, like, this is actually one. It's funny how people will develop, and they'll be like, they'll finally get view models and the benefits of them, and stash and stuff like that. And then they'll just start trying to do everything in view models. There is a place in CanJS, or like, because CanJS has control, there are places for when you should really be kind of like DOM-centric in building things. And this app is a good example. It's got a lot of drag drop. Drag drop is all about element positions and things like that. So you're dealing with a lot of DOM state, elements getting added, removed, positions of elements as they're being dragged. It doesn't make sense to manage that all in a view model, really. So what this example shows, a really good one to learn from if you're building complex UIs, is essentially what it does is it creates some control that can essentially be installed on an element that emits events for like drag drop and things like that. Then that can tie into a view model. So it kind of like, another example where I've seen it is you might want a scroll bar to know when like an element has become visible in the page, and there aren't DOM events for that. So what you can do is create a control that is going to emit fake DOM events for when elements become visible in the page. That's a perfect place for a can control. Makes it reusable. You can invoke that from stash. That's totally the way you should do that kind of thing. So, pro tip.
Yeah. Cool. Let me stop sharing. All right. Yeah, that's all I've got. Do we have anything else before we go?
Nope.
Nope.
Cool. I guess I would say one final thing. Speaking of hiring Bitovi, this isn't really a plug, but I've heard rumor that we might find someone who could partner with us to do incremental server-side rendering, which would be really cool. So I guess it is related. The plug is that like Bitobi will accept very low rates for experimental cool stuff. So if you were like, hey, we really want to make our page a lot faster, and you're gonna like let us push like technology envelope, you should reach out to us, because like we like to play around and do cool things. So we might have someone for a cool thing.
Cool. All right, I think that's it. Everyone who's watching on YouTube, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Cool.
See ya.
Thanks, Jason.